It was the kind of cold that crept into your bones and stayed there, whispering reminders of everything you'd lost. The snow outside the small-town diner swirled like 1,000 tiny ghosts, brushing against the fogged windows as a weary woman stepped through the door, holding a small girl in her arms and a little boy by the hand. Her coat was too thin, her eyes too tired, and her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft enough to break a heart. "Do you have any leftover soup?" The waitress froze, her coffee pot trembling in her grip. Conversations in the diner quieted. Forks stopped clinking against plates. All eyes drifted toward the young mother and her 2 children, standing by the counter with faces pale from the cold. Before we dive deeper into this story, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you believe in kindness, compassion, and second chances, because sometimes the smallest act of care can change someone's entire world. Her name was Emily Carter, and until a year ago, her world had been perfectly ordinary. She and her husband, Mark, had owned a little house just outside of town. Mark worked construction. Emily stayed home with their kids, 5-year-old Noah and 2-year-old Lily. Life wasn't luxurious, but it was theirs, and it was full of laughter, homemade dinners, and the warmth of family. Then one rainy morning, a call came that shattered everything. Mark had been working on a site when a scaffolding collapsed. He was gone before the ambulance even arrived. The days that followed blurred into each other. Funeral arrangements, condolences, paperwork, the unbearable silence of nights without his voice. Emily tried to hold herself together for her children, but the world kept taking more. The bills piled up. The savings vanished. When the landlord raised the rent, she had no choice but to leave. They'd been drifting ever since, from shelter to shelter, from the back seat of her aging car to cheap motels when she could afford them. Every day became a question of survival, finding food, warmth, safety. That morning, the gas gauge had dipped below empty, and the little she had left was a few crumpled dollars and a prayer. She'd spotted the diner by chance, a small place called Marty's with a glowing open sign, and hoped, maybe, that they'd have something, anything, to spare. When she asked for leftover soup, her voice trembled not out of embarrassment, but exhaustion. Behind her, a man sitting at the counter looked up from his coffee. His name was Daniel Brooks, a 34-year-old single father who worked as a mechanic in town. He'd come to Marty's almost every morning since his wife passed away from cancer 3 years earlier. Life had made him quiet, cautious, and hard to surprise. But something about the woman's tone cut through him like a knife. He watched as the waitress stammered, unsure what to say. Emily gave a small, apologetic smile, clutching her daughter closer, as if trying to make herself smaller, invisible. Noah tugged at her coat, whispering something about being hungry. Daniel saw the way she looked at her kids, tired eyes filled with love and desperation, and something inside him shifted. He stood, walked over to the counter, and cleared his throat. "Hey," he said gently, meeting the waitress's uncertain gaze, "why don't you bring them a couple bowls of soup, and whatever else you've got fresh in the back? I'll take care of it." Emily's head snapped up, startled. "Oh no, you don't have to," but Daniel just gave her a small smile. "Please, let me." The waitress nodded and hurried off, and for the first time in a long while, Emily didn't know what to say. She sat down hesitantly, setting Lily on her lap and helping Noah into the booth. The smell of coffee and warm bread filled the air, and for a fleeting moment, she felt like she'd stepped back into another life. One where things were normal, where her children's laughter wasn't a luxury. Daniel sat a few seats away, pretending to sip his coffee, but his eyes kept drifting toward her. There was something about her that tugged at him, a mix of quiet strength and heartbreak. When the food arrived, he watched as Noah devoured his soup like he hadn't eaten in days, and Lily's small hands wrapped around the warm bowl as if it were treasure. Emily whispered a thank you, her voice cracking, and Daniel simply nodded. After they ate, she tried to pay him back with the few dollars she had left, but he shook his head firmly. "Keep it. For gas, or whatever else you need." Tears welled in her eyes, and she whispered, "You don't even know us." Daniel smiled softly. "You don't have to know someone to care. Over the next few weeks, Emily couldn't stop thinking about that morning. She'd planned to keep moving, but her car broke down 2 miles outside of town. With nowhere else to go, she found a temporary room at a church shelter. She started doing odd cleaning jobs around town to make ends meet, sometimes seeing Daniel's truck pass by on his way to work. He noticed her too, always polite, always grateful, never asking for more than she needed. One afternoon, when he saw her walking in the cold with her kids, he stopped and offered a ride. From then on, it became a quiet routine, small acts of kindness that began to bridge the gap between 2 broken lives. One evening, after dropping her off at the shelter, Daniel hesitated before driving away. He couldn't ignore how much he admired her resilience. She never complained, never begged, and always put her children first. That night he called his sister, who ran a small daycare, and asked if she could help Emily find some steady work. Within a week, Emily started working there part-time, cleaning and organizing, while her kids played safely nearby. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a sense of normalcy she hadn't felt in a long time. As the months passed, Emily and Daniel's paths kept crossing, at the diner, the daycare, the grocery store. He'd bring her coffee on cold mornings. She'd pack extra muffins for him when he was too busy to eat. Slowly, carefully, trust began to bloom where pain once lived. Daniel had his own scars. Losing his wife, Rachel, had left him hollow for years. He'd thrown himself into work and parenting, believing love was something he'd already spent. But seeing Emily, her gentleness, her strength, the way she mothered her children despite the storms, awoke something in him. One evening, when Emily's son fell ill, Daniel showed up with soup, medicine, and a worried look that spoke louder than words. They sat together in the quiet, the glow of the small lamp between them, sharing stories about their pasts, about grief, love, and the cruel ways life could take everything yet still expect you to keep going. By the time spring arrived, Emily had saved enough to rent a small apartment. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Daniel helped her move in, fixing the creaky door and hanging curtains with Noah's eager assistance. That night, as they stood in the tiny kitchen, Emily looked at him with tearful eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," Daniel smiled. "You already have." But life, as it always does, had one more test waiting. A month later, Emily's old car, her only link to her cleaning jobs, was towed after breaking down in the wrong spot. The repair costs were more than she could manage, and the stress of possibly losing her income pressed heavily on her chest. That evening, she sat at the diner, the same one where it had all started, with her hands wrapped around an empty coffee cup, trying not to cry. Daniel walked in, instantly sensing something was wrong. When she told him what happened, he didn't hesitate. The next morning, he spent his day off repairing her car, using spare parts from his shop and refusing to take a cent. When she protested, he simply said, "You do the same for me," and she realized she would. From then on, their friendship deepened into something neither dared to name but both silently felt. It was in the way he looked at her kids as if they were his own, in how her laughter returned when he was near, in the peace that filled spaces that once echoed with loss. Months later, on the anniversary of Mark's passing, Daniel found her sitting by the lake with her children. She didn't speak, just stared at the water, her eyes glistening. He sat beside her, offering quiet company. After a long silence, she whispered, "I used to think I'd never smile again, that life was just surviving. But then people like you remind me that kindness still exists. Maybe that's what saves us, just small acts of kindness." He looked at her, the wind tousling her hair, and said softly, "Maybe that's what brought us here." 2 years later, Marty's diner was filled with laughter again. Emily stood behind the counter in a new uniform, the manager's badge pinned proudly on her chest. She'd rebuilt her life piece by piece, one act of grace at a time. Her children sat in a booth, coloring quietly, and across from them was Daniel, now her husband, smiling like a man who'd found his home again. A woman walked in, holding a small boy by the hand, her eyes weary, her voice uncertain. "Do you have any leftover soup?" Emily froze. For a moment, She was back in that cold winter day, standing exactly where that woman stood now. Her eyes softened, and she smiled. "Of course we do. Take a seat, I'll bring it right out." As she turned, Daniel caught her gaze and gave a quiet, knowing nod. The cycle had come full circle. The kindness that saved her was now hers to give. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's remind the world that a single act of kindness, just one, can change a life forever. Special request: comment below with the words "kindness lives on" if you believe that compassion can heal even the deepest wounds. Because sometimes all it takes is a bowl of leftover soup, and someone who cares enough to share it.